I used to think grief sounded like silence, but on the first night after Michael's funeral it had a sound, a faint clicking behind the bedroom wall, like a zipper dragged very slowly. I lay awake in the dark listening to our house breathe in unfamiliar ways, stretching around the space he no longer filled. By morning I had convinced myself it was the old HVAC, or the settling of wood in late autumn. Anything ordinary. I needed ordinary. Instead, while I was stripping the sheets to wash away the smell of Lily's and strangers' cologne from the reception, my hand brushed a rough seam inside the top shelf of Michael's closet and the shelf shifted. Not much, just enough to change the air. A colder thread spilled over my wrist, carrying the dust of a place that had not met light in a very long time. If stories like this grip you, quiet houses, louder secrets, take a second to subscribe. New chapters drop in sequence, each picking up exactly where the last one leaves your pulse. The shelf slid forward under the weight of my palm, as if it wanted to be found. Beneath it, framed by raw 2x4s, was a shallow crawl space no bigger than a suitcase, lined in untreated pine that smelled faintly of turpentine. Michael had been meticulous about everything from our taxes to his tie clips. He would never have tolerated rough carpentry in his own closet. I told myself it must have been from the previous owners, a sensible explanation, right until I saw the object inside. A matte black box about the size of a hat box, wrapped once with twine that had dug a permanent furrow into the lid. On the top, written in blocky letters I recognized from grocery lists and sticky notes on the fridge, was a message in Sharpie that made the tiny hairs on my arms rise: "Do not open." There is a particular kind of instruction that doesn't sound like a request so much as a dare. I sat on the carpet and stared at the box until my legs went numb. The house ticked inside. Outside, leaf blowers droned through the cul-de-sac. Somewhere, a dog barked twice and then thought better of it. My mind kept wandering to practicalities, to bank forms, to insurance claims, to the mortuary spelling our last name wrong, because those were problems I knew how to fix. But the box sat there like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence I had not realized Michael was writing. The twine had been knotted in a way my fingers knew, the same square knot he used on Christmas packages, tightened with a quick, practiced jerk. He had wanted it to hold. In widowhood, people deliver casseroles and advice. They tell you to hydrate, to rest, to avoid making major decisions for at least 6 months. No one tells you what to do when your spouse leaves a secret in your closet that hums like a low-voltage current. I fetched scissors and cut the twine. The fiber snapped with a dry whisper. The lid did not fly back or release a poison needle, the fear-riddled fantasies I had constructed in the span of a minute, but instead lifted with the reluctant sigh of a jar that has been sealed for years. Inside, everything was wrapped in brown paper and labeled in the same careful hand: photographs, receipts, letters, keys, tape. No last name, no dates, no context. Each bundle was tight, geometric, almost ceremonial, as if Michael had been building a time capsule for someone he could not bear to face. I picked up the smallest parcel, keys, and immediately understood why the box had felt heavier than it looked. The bundle contained a ring of 6, 2 modern house keys, a brass skeleton key with a clover bow, a safe deposit key with a stamped number, and 2 that resembled the tubular kind used on lockers and vending machines. The safe deposit key was engraved with the bank's logo we had used for 22 years, but the number was not familiar. The skeleton key irritated a splinter of memory, an antique we had seen at a flea market the summer we almost bought the lake cabin. He had run his thumb over the teeth and said, "Every key wants its lock." I had laughed then, not realizing I was memorizing a line that would return like a boomerang when I least expected it. Next I unwrapped photographs. Instead of our wedding, our vacations, our ordinary life, images I knew by heart, these were glossy 4x6 prints of places I had never been, dated with a black stamp along the white border: Akron, 2001. Providence, 2005. Missoula, 2008. The angles were clinical, as if taken by an adjuster or a detective: doorways, mailboxes, the corners of rooms, the underside of a desk with a serial number visible, sometimes the edge of a hand entering the frame, never a face. On the reverse of each was a single initial, A, B, C, written in pencil. I stacked them in order on the carpet and realized the initials cycled, repeating every 3 images. 3 letters. 3 places per year. 3 steps of something I couldn't yet name. Receipts were the opposite of Michael's monthly spreadsheet virtue. These were cash transactions, storage unit renewals, a post office box in a town 40 miles away, a locksmith who specialized in heritage hardware, and once, chillingly, a florist with a note field that read simply, "No card." The dates formed a lattice with the photographs, an alternating pattern that suggested a rhythm, a ritual. It looked less like an affair and more like maintenance. Of what, I could not tell. The parcel labeled letters was not correspondence he had received, but carbon copies he had made of his own outgoing mail. Typewritten, formal, mailed certified to names I did not recognize, a Dr. Neff at a psychiatric hospital that had been shut down in the 90s, a records administrator at a county clerk's office 2 states away, a retired judge. Each letter requested the same thing in slightly different words: access to sealed materials connected to a case number that was always partially redacted. Twice he wrote, as the surviving party, "I believe I have standing." Twice he was denied, if the stamped "returned, insufficient authorization" meant what I thought it did. I saved tape for last. It was a single mini DV cassette, the kind our old camcorder used before phones learned to swallow memory whole. On the label he had written, "For E, if necessary." He had underlined "necessary" twice. My name is Evelyn, and he rarely used my initial unless he was teasing or protecting something. The underline looked nothing like a joke. In the space between takes of breath I realized my hands were shaking so badly I had put the lid back on the box without meaning to. Grief is a storm, discovery is the lightning that splits it. The rational part of me tried to inventory my options. I could call our lawyer and ask, delicately, whether Michael had mentioned any contingencies. I could take the safe deposit key to the bank and pretend ignorance, which would be only slightly fiction. I could borrow a camcorder from the neighbor whose son still filmed high school games and see what Michael thought might one day be necessary. Or I could close the box, slide the shelf back, and choose the mercy of not knowing. But the thing about instructions like "do not open" is that once you have disobeyed them, the next command is already inside you: keep going. I carried the box to the dining table, the formal one we almost never used, and laid everything out under the chandelier like evidence awaiting a precise, patient prosecutor. I took a photo with my phone in case I lost my nerve and needed to prove to myself later that this had been real. Then I returned to the closet and pushed the shelf up and back into place. It clicked home with a sound like a sealed promise. Only then did I see, along the inner lip of the frame, 4 shallow notches carved into the pine at careful intervals. The kind a carpenter might make to measure. Or the kind an anxious man might make counting the times he had opened a space and prayed it would still be there when he returned it to the dark. Outside, the afternoon light had thinned to the weak tea color of early winter. Somewhere down the block, a delivery truck exhaled and moved on. The house settled again. The clicking behind the wall did not return. Instead I heard something else, the soft, very human sound of my own voice saying into the quiet, "What did you do, Michael?" The question didn't accuse. It included me. Because whatever he had done, he had aimed the end of it at me with the certainty that I would find it. He had written my initial on a tape and tied it to a warning he knew I would disobey. Love is often trust, sometimes it is choreography. I did not sleep that night. I spread the photographs in repeating sequences and charted the receipts in a notebook, drawing thin lines between dates that rhymed. I read the letters until I could recite phrases of denial with my eyes shut. And just before dawn, when the neighborhood belonged only to the milk-white breath of the streetlights, I understood 2 things with bone-deep clarity. First, that the cassette held a story he could not bear to tell out loud. Second, that the skeleton key in my palm was older than our marriage and newer than our vows. Every key wants its lock. Somewhere beyond our house, a lock was waiting to be found, and I was already standing in its hallway. I waited until the house settled into its winter creaks before returning to Michael's closet. Something about that box had changed the geometry of the room. Walls felt closer, the air denser, the light from the hall yawned at the threshold as if the doorway itself was reluctant to let me in again. I had rehearsed the sensible plan: call Thomas, call the sheriff, call anyone, but common sense hummed like a machine in another room while curiosity pressed its palm against this door. If you are new here and want the full story as it unfolds, subscribe now. This is one I am telling in order, and the order matters. I set my phone to record, angled the screen just inside the threshold, and breathed in the stale pocket of air that closets trap from the year you moved in, the year you loved someone, the year you lost them. Michael had kept everything crisp, shirts spaced precisely, shoe toes aligned, belts hung by size. But the box had left prints on more than memory. Fibers on the cedar shelf had a faint rectangular ghost, darker than the wood, as if a shadow persisted where an object had once lived. In crime scene training videos, examiners dust for prints they cannot see. I discovered another kind, the print of absence. Order can be a disguise. I scanned seams, corners, and the sliver of baseboard behind a stack of garment bags. Something gnawed at me about the closet's depth. It felt longer on the inside than the wall on the outside suggested. Architects make mistakes, grief makes geometry subjective. I pressed a knuckle along the painted drywall and listened. Solid. Hollow. Solid. Then a note half a pitch lower. I remembered an article about older homes in our county, lumber mills marking studs with grease pencil that later bled through paint in faint verticals. I angled the phone's flashlight, not at the wall, but across it, letting the beam rake the surface instead of flooding it. The low angle pulled up textures, brush lines, nail heads painted over, and there. A hairline divide that ran like a healed scar from waist height to the floor. The divide terminated behind a built-in shoe rack. Michael never built anything himself. He measured, hired, supervised, then admired. I eased the rack outward a fraction and felt resistance, as if a magnet were holding it to the wall. No, not a magnet, two countersunk screws painted to match the trim. He had them color-matched. That was Michael. The screwdriver on my keychain was a toy until it wasn't. Paint cracked, screw heads turned, wood sighed. When the rack came free, a shallow panel no wider than my shoulders stared back. Someone had set it on friction catches. I slid my fingers beneath its lip, expecting weight. It lifted smoothly, almost politely, revealing a cavity no deeper than a handspan and yet deep enough to hold a life. Inside, a second box waited. Smaller. Wrapped in butcher paper aged to the color of weak tea and bound with two loops of twine that had been tied by a right-handed person with a steady hand. In the corner, graphite had pressed a word I had to squint to read. Not a word. An initial, written twice as if the writer had tested pressure and then committed. LL. I did not know an L. Not a sister of his, not a cousin. There are entire genealogies sitting in courthouse basements to prove who we come from, and yet a single letter can unmake your map. I did not open it. Not that one. Not yet. Zygarnik has a law about the mind liking unfinished business more than done business. The mind leans toward what is unresolved like a plant toward light. I set the smaller box on the cedar shelf and went after the cavity instead. If there was one space, there could be two. Closets conceal in layers because people do. Along the right edge, my nail caught another seam, thinner, less confident than the first. The panel inside the opening bowed when I pressed. Behind it came a smell that did not belong to clothing or cedar or paint. It was metallic and cool. Old coin smell, rain on iron, the ghost of a hospital corridor. I thought of basements. I thought of bodies. The mind performs its own lighting design in the dark. The second panel released with the sound of tape peeling from a table, though no adhesive remained. Behind it, not another void, but infrastructure, a cavity housing conduit and an old fuse disused since we upgraded the house to breakers. A settler's solution: use the dead space around utilities as a hide. Taped to the conduit with careful bands of linen tape, I found a flat packet wrapped in wax paper, waterproofed the way a field biologist protects notes in rain. He had never been a field biologist. Michael was a museum piece in all things. perfect tie knots, careful winds, holidays filed like records. Secrets catalogued, too. I did not open that packet either. Not yet. The human brain cannot process multiple shocks and make meaning at the same time without cheapening one or missing another. I put both back exactly as found, closed the inner panel, seated the shoe rack, replaced the color-matched screws, and stood with my hand on the doorknob until my pulse had the decency to slow. The trick with fear is to give it a job. I assigned it inventory duty. It would count and recount what I had seen while the rest of me made tea and pretended to be a person who could sleep. Sleep did not come. Instead, memory sent me to a minor note in our life together, something most couples would not remember, the day a contractor quoted us for built-ins and Michael insisted on flush shadow lines, almost ceremonial about the phrase. I googled it now at 2 a.m. Flush shadow lines, reveals engineered into millwork that let panels breathe, expand, and contract, while appearing seamless. The term shadow line is such an honest lie. A line that masks his absence. He had told me his office needed clean edges because, in his work, clients equated clean with trustworthy. He had practiced the same architecture on himself. At dawn, I returned to the closet with a new rule: open one thing only, document it, step away. I chose the waxed packet. The linen tape lifted with a whisper, leaving a weave pattern on my fingertips. Inside the wax paper, a heavy manila envelope held photographs. Not files. Not deeds. Photographs. 30 or so, matte, printed with borders like you saw on drugstore prints 20 years ago. The first showed a roadside motel with a name I could not place, though its sign wore a font you cannot kill in the American highway system. The second showed a woman on the stoop of a small apartment building, looking away from the camera. Her hair was a pale halo in the sun, not gray, just overwhelmed by light. The third showed Michael. Not my Michael at our table. A younger one, face turned 3/4, not posing but not unaware, standing in front of a courthouse I recognized from our county seat. He had a hand on the shoulder of a boy of about 8 whose ears stuck out in the way ears do before a face grows into them. The boy's smile was a private thing, aimed at someone behind the lens. On the back of that photograph, a stamp from a 1-hour lab and a date 2 years before Michael and I met. My body made a sound I did not know it could make, a low, unclaimed exhale. It was not the sound of betrayal, not yet. It was the sound of the past expanding to include rooms I had not toured when I signed the lease on a life with a man. I returned the photographs to the envelope and the envelope to the wax paper and the wax paper to the conduit with the linen tape assistant. I am methodical when it counts. Then I reached for the smaller butcher-papered box with the LL penciled in its corner. The twine cut easier than it looked, as if old knots lose their pride. Inside, a velvet ring box waited, the kind jewelers use when they want people to listen to hinges. This hinge did not sing. It opened on felt that had once cradled a ring, but the ring was gone. In its place, a folded receipt, an appraisal slip, and a business card for a store in a town 90 minutes from here where no one knows me by name. On the back of the card, Michael's hand, hold until May 12th. L. must sign. There are dates that wake a house. May 12th was the day his first wife left him, according to the story he told me. The story might still be true, in the way a poem is true and a weather report is true. Truth has rooms, too. L could be that wife, I told myself, because people have initials and marriages have ghosts. But the boy in the photograph had his mouth. It is a dangerous thing, recognizing someone by resemblance before you earn the right. My phone chimed. A calendar notification from a life that did not know about conduits or linen tape. I silenced it and took a picture of the business card, then typed the store's number into a search bar to see if it still existed. It did, with a new owner and a cheerful banner about custom resettings and second chances. I could call. I could not. I stood at the closet threshold with the card in one hand and the rope of my robe in the other and felt like a person at a river who knows the water is cold, who knows the crossing is necessary, who knows once you step in, you are committed to the far bank whether or not you reach it. I will cross, but not all at once. The mind leans toward what is unresolved. Let it lean. I slid the velvet box back into the butcher paper, retied the twine as best I could, replaced the inner panel, then the shoe rack, then the color-matched screws, then the shirts to their original spacing. I closed the closet door and set my back against it until the latch cooled beneath my spine. There are basements in houses and basements in people. Michael's closet had both. The box labeled "Do Not Open" was a beginning, not a boundary. What the photographs suggested will send me under the house before this is done. Basements water the roots. Roots do not explain the fruit, but they dare you to pretend you did not taste it. Next, I will go where the receipt wants me to go. Not alone. Not at night. The mind loves a cliffhanger, the body prefers a plan. I will bring both. I left the box on the dining table like a live wire and took the business card to the only place it could lead, a narrow street where the buildings leaned in over the asphalt like they were eavesdropping. The jeweler's shop was older than the sidewalk that held it, a stubborn sliver of brass and glass wedged between a locksmith and a shuttered tailor. The bell over the door gave a tired little cry when I stepped inside, and the air changed, quieter, thicker, perfumed with metal dust and lemon oil. Every surface caught the light in different ways, throwing back tiny aureoles and blades of brightness. It felt like walking into a room made of paused seconds. Behind the counter, a woman with gray eyes and a steady posture looked up without surprise. Her apron was dark with a soft sheen where hands had polished the fabric smooth, her fingers were blunt, capable. I placed the card down and told her I was here about a custom locket from years ago. I did not say my husband's name. I did not say the box. I gave her less than a full sentence, and watched how much she could read in it. She took the card like a librarian accepting a rare book. One glance, and her face changed almost imperceptibly, something like recollection tightening the skin around her eyes. She turned to a small ledger bound in cracking red leather and began to flip. The sound of paper, soft, dry, inevitable, was the metronome of my pulse. She found a page quickly, then paused, not at the entry itself, but on the margin where someone had pressed too hard with a pen and left a dent I could feel from where I stood. The shop filled with a silence so present it seemed lit from within. I remember, she said finally, voice low enough that the glass counter fogged with it. Gentleman came in on a Tuesday, winter. Kept his gloves on a long time. He ordered a locket. She didn't look at me as she said it, only at the ledger, as if the truth required a referee. He gave me a name for the engraving. 2 letters and a hyphenated surname. He was very particular about the hyphen. 2 letters. The ones in my notebook. The ones in the box. LL, I said, because if I didn't say it I might start shaking. The woman's eyes flicked up to mine, and in that fraction I saw we were having the same thought, that letters can weigh more than rings. She nodded once and turned the ledger so I could see the entry. There it was, in black ink surrendering slowly to sepia, locket, 14K. Chain, fine. Engrave, LLL. The surname began, then stopped. The ink line wandered into blankness. An order abandoned mid-stroke. What happened to the rest? My voice sounded careful, as if I could keep the answer from becoming real by speaking softly to it. He changed his mind, she said. He asked me to leave it incomplete until he confirmed the spelling. He never came back. I wanted to ask the next question but the room would not let me. The bell over the door jittered at a draft and settled again like a heartbeat returning to normal. I kept my hands on the glass, palms flat, as if the counter could talk me down from the edge my thoughts were crowding. If Michael had walked in here and named those letters, if he had held that unfinished name in his mouth, then the box wasn't a stray archive of grief, it was a map. A route he had not taken in daylight. Do you have the locket? I asked. If he never picked it up. For the first time the woman hesitated. She looked not at the shelves behind her but at a small, locked cabinet near the register. The key to it lived on a slender chain around her neck, and when she lifted it, the gesture had the tenderness of ritual. She opened the cabinet and brought out a velvet tray older than my marriage. In it, a plain oval locket lay on its side, modest as an apology. No photo. No initials. Nothing but a soft, uncanny feeling, the way a glass of water looks different after someone says it's holy. He paid in cash, she said. Half up front. He told me the rest would come when the name was perfect. The name was never perfect. The ledger said so. The ring of the bell said so. The winter Tuesday said so. I could feel the whole story crowding towards me without breaking through, like a wave that refuses to crest. Zygarnik's law and a piece of jewelry, the unfinished engraving more vivid than any complete one, the mind unable to put it down because it needed the last stroke that never came. Did he? I stopped, tried again. Did he say who LL was to him? She met my eyes without blinking. He didn't. But he looked at the sample chains like a man measuring time. I thanked her and stepped back out into the street where ordinary light made ordinary promises. The card in my pocket burned a shape into the lining of my coat. On the bus home I kept seeing the ledger's margin, the pen dent interrupting the surname like a pulse that had stuttered. I thought of the photo in the box with the date no one had ever told me about. I thought of the motel key, the national park map with a circle around a trailhead we had never hiked. Curiosity is not a gentle teacher. It fills your mouth with questions until you can taste the metal of them. At home, I set the locket on the table next to the box without opening either. A matched set of unfinished things. I told myself I would make tea, that I would be sensible, that I would allow the day to cool. Instead, I walked to Michael's desk and pulled out the bottom drawer where he hid the mess he pretended he did not have. Beneath manuals and old receipts was a stack of greeting cards still in their plastic sleeves, a thing he bought in bulk so he would never have to run to the drugstore at the last minute. The top card was blank inside, blue outside, with 2 white initials printed like a monogram you could assign a life to. LL. Not an accusation. Not an alibi. Just a coincidence with a mean streak. I pressed my hand flat on the desk so I wouldn't throw the cards away. In the mirror over the mantel I saw a woman leaning a fraction to the left, a woman who looked like the ghost of her own balance. I realized then that I had not asked the jeweler the most obvious question: who sent the man here, where had he heard of this shop? People do not stumble into the kind of places that keep ledgers. They are brought. The phone vibrated. A number I didn't recognize, area code from 2 states away. I let it ring out and turn to voicemail, then curiosity, meaner and better fed than caution, made me play it. A woman's voice, careful as someone carrying a full glass across a crowded room. She said my name, and then she said my husband's, and only then did she say hers. 2 syllables. Both starting with L. She did not explain how she had my number. She did not say what she wanted. She only said a place and a time and added, very softly, I know about the locket. The recording ended with the sound of her breath, like she had meant to say more and the courage had left her at the last second. I replayed it 3 times and wrote the name down slowly, as if the pen might reject it. It didn't. Ink never tells you when you're making a mistake. When the house settled that night, every board and pipe sounded like a decision. I put the locket in my pocket, the business card back on the table, the notebook in my bag. I lay down without sleeping and counted the unfinished things, the engraving, the message, the drawer, the path circled on a map. Somewhere a woman was folding and unfolding the same 2 letters I was. Somewhere the last stroke of the surname waited for a hand steady enough to complete it. Hook. Rehook. The mind returns to what it can't complete. The next morning I would go to the place she named. I would ask the question the ledger left blank. And for the first time since the funeral, I understood a new kind of fear, not of what I would find, but of what I would become after I knew. The text arrived at 10:41 p.m., a minute after the last train slid past my block with a sigh that sounded like something deciding against coming home. Come alone. Old Depot Cafe. Back entrance. 11:15, bring the locket. L. Every warning I'd ever been taught rose like a flock of birds inside my chest, beating against my ribs, but the locket felt heavier than fear. I didn't tell anyone. I left every light in the house on as if a trail of domestic glow could lead me back. On my way out, I paused long enough to look at Michael's photograph, his half-smile, the crease near his eye, and I heard myself whisper, "If this is a mistake, stop me." The silence did not disagree. The old depot cafe had died the way small towns die, first the trains, then the coffee, then the conversation. The building crouched beside the tracks, boarded windows swallowing what little moonlight there was. A sign still hung, tilted, a coffee cup painted with the optimism of a decade that never imagined closure. Wind shouldered grit along the platform, lifting paper into exhausted dances. I followed the narrow alley to the back where a rusted door waited like a held breath. Inside, the dark wasn't empty, it had texture, soot, old sugar, the animal damp of places that outlive their purpose. My phone's flashlight carved a path over overturned chairs and a stainless counter scarred by years of cups set down in confession. The espresso machine hulkied like a beached animal. Somewhere deeper, a drip kept time, somewhere farther, the building settled the way bones talk in sleep. Evelyn. The voice came from a booth by the far window, and I killed the light by reflex. She was only silhouette at first, narrow shoulders, hair pinned without vanity, a coat that was practical more than warm. When my eyes adjusted, I saw a woman in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, face the kind you wouldn't remember in a crowd until it was the only face left. Her gaze moved to the spot where the locket rested against my throat, as if it were a word I had mispronounced. "You kept it," she said. "You told me to bring it." The chair across from her complained when I Saturday, "Who are you?" She placed a folded napkin on the table between us, oddly clean in all this dust. "Someone who tried to warn him." "Warn Michael?" "Warn anyone who would listen." She watched my hands. I kept them still on the table, though I felt my pulse in every finger. "He didn't listen, but he prepared things. For you." Prepared things. The phrase nicked something inside me. What does L stand for? She didn't answer the question. Instead, she nodded toward my collarbone. "Open it." I hesitated. The locket had already revealed a photograph that did not belong to me and a name etched into the metal that did not belong to the wife I had been. But I opened it anyway. The hinge complained softly. This time there was a different detail, so small I might have missed it if she hadn't been watching me with a patience so precise it felt like direction. Behind the photo, folded to the size of a fingernail, a slip of paper. I coaxed it free with my nail. Tuesday. The orchard. Sunset. No signature. No date. Just instructions that felt like a receipt for an appointment someone had kept without me. I kept my voice flat. "What orchard?" She met my eyes. "The one he never took you to." She said it gently, without triumph, the way a nurse tells you an outcome and holds your gaze so you don't fall through it. I heard the low note of a passing freight train and the glass of the window vibrated, the napkin trembled as if it were breathing. I realized I was leaning forward, hungry for anything that collapsed the distance between what I knew and what had happened. "He had another life?" I asked, the words tasting like old pennies. "Not another," she said. "A life before. A promise he tried to outgrow." I wanted the floor to tilt, the dramatic shudder of revelation, but the room stayed stubbornly level. All I felt was the ordinary ache of a bruise being pressed. "Who are you to him?" "Closer than you want me to be." She let that sit long enough to sting, then added, "And farther than he ever let me be." Both can be true. The drip in the dark seemed to grow louder. "Why meet here?" "Because no one remembers this place. Because people mistake neglect for safety." She glanced at the back door. "And because it gives us a view." "A view of what?" She didn't answer. Instead she slid a small object across the table. A key, brass worn smooth, teeth curled like an old smile. On its bow, a number was stamped, 17. I noticed the faintest scent rising from it, apples. The orchard. Memory masquerading as smell. Michael left that in a locker, she said. At the depot. They sealed the lockers when the station closed, but the padlocks are theater. 17 will still open. What's inside is yours. Not mine. Not his anymore. Why give it to me now? Because the next train will be the last one for the night. Because people follow schedules even when they think they don't. Her mouth thinned, an expression equal parts apology and rehearsal. And because you already know you'll go. The rehook hit me like cold air, the locker, a number, a promise folded into metal. What happens if I don't? You will, she said, not unkindly. Curiosity is a tide. You can shout at the moon, but it won't unteach the water. I reached for the key and stopped halfway. Tell me who you are, at least. Her gaze flicked to the window. I turned to follow it and saw only my reflection layered over the ghosted platform, the suggestion of motion beyond the glass, the long, slow approach of a headlight somewhere down the track. When I looked back, she was studying me the way you examine a door you're about to close. You won't thank me, she said. Not tonight. Are you the woman from the photograph? Silence moved between us the way fog moves, present, touchable, and dishonest about edges. Finally she said, ask me that again when you've opened the locker. I wanted to argue, to demand the rest of the story, but she had the gravity of someone who had already watched a thing happen and knew which parts would only make sense in sequence. Outside, the low horn bled through the walls, a sound older than any of us. She stood. Wait, I said. Michael, did he love? She shook her head. Choose your tense carefully. It will hurt less. She broke eye contact first. Her hand brushed the booth's chipped edge, and for an instant I thought she might reach toward me, some contact that would convert this into something human. But she only adjusted her coat and moved past me. Her steps made no sound that I could trust. The back door breathed cold, then shut. I sat alone while the train arrived but did not stop, long cars whispering past like the backs of animals you only glimpse when the forest decides to move. The key waited where she had left it, absurdly small, indecently certain. I picked it up, and the metal was warm, as if it had remembered the hand that carried it here. I turned my phone's flashlight back on and swept the beam across the cafe, half expecting a second presence to declare itself, some coda to the encounter that would tell me I hadn't just drifted into someone else's unfinished business. The light found the napkin she'd placed between us. I lifted it. Underneath, someone had scratched a single line into the tabletop, deep enough to catch the pad of my finger. Tell no one. The gouge was old. The advice felt new. I left by the back and crossed the platform. The night had sharpened while we were inside. Stars had showed up to witness without volunteering help. The station doors hung open, two hollow eyes. Inside, the air was colder, the dust more honest. The lockers ran along the wall in a tidy grid of squares. 17 had been painted over once, then again, the numbers ghosting through like handwriting you can't quite erase. I slipped the key into the lock. It resisted with the stubbornness of things that remember better times, then turned. The door swung open on a sigh of air that smelled of metal and apples and the thin ozone of old electricity. What I saw inside wasn't dramatic. It was worse, a manila envelope, ordinary as a bill, fat with the weight of consequences, stamped with a return address I recognized and did not. The orchard's name. A date. And a second key taped to the flap, smaller, silver, the kind you use on boxes that say do not open when what they mean is not yet. I didn't take a breath. I didn't blink. I only listened to my heartbeat and the far-off quiet where a woman had been sitting a few minutes ago and now was not. The depot hummed its old, electric prayer. Behind me, the platform stood empty except for footprints that could have been mine. Or hers. Or anyone's who had learned the hard way that secrets don't rot, they seed. I slid the envelope into my bag and closed the locker. The cheap metal clicked with a finality that felt ceremonial. Somewhere beyond the tracks, an orchard waited for Tuesday's sunset, whether I believed in it or not. And the question I did not want, who is she to Michael? Who is Michael to me now that I've met her, followed me out into the night like a second shadow. By morning the second key felt heavier than metal, like a decision I hadn't agreed to but was already living inside. It wasn't a house key, the cuts were too fine, the stem oddly short, a stamped number, 317B, barely visible under tarnish. I kept turning it in my palm while the kettle hissed, realizing it wasn't meant for a door at all. Boxes. Lockers. Vaults. The word lodged in my throat the way a name does when you realize you've mispronounced it for years. I drove with the key in my coat pocket, the box still sealed in painter's tape on the passenger seat, as if restraint could undo curiosity. The address Michael had scribbled on one of those Polaroids from Prompt 3, blurred streetlights, a bank sign caught mid-flicker, was less than 20 minutes away, tucked between an aging deli and a storefront church whose window declared God is able in hand-cut gold vinyl. The bank itself looked like it had been built during a decade that loved marble and hush, its lobby a shallow pool of sound where heels clicked and died. I signed my name on a clipboard that remembered better years and slid Michael's "in case of death" card across the counter. The clerk glanced at it and then at me with a practiced neutrality I recognized from hospitals, the look that says we keep the rules because otherwise we can't keep standing. The vault was colder than January, a long aisle of brushed steel doors that made every breath feel too loud. The attendant, tie too tight, wedding ring too loose, led me to a booth with a pull curtain and a table that was more slab than furniture. He handed me the narrow metal box that matched my key and left with a kindness, "Take your time." His shoes faded into the carpeted quiet. I listened for a full minute to nothing, trying to decide if I was about to open a love letter or a wound. Inside the deposit box there were no diamonds, no passports, no fat envelopes that could barter with grief. Just paper. A slim black notebook, 3 manila folders, a cassette tape in a cracked plastic case, and a keycard with a red stripe worn almost to transparency. The top folder had maintenance typed on a label that was a lie. It held photocopies of emails that should never have been printed, redacted pages with the deletions done by hand, marker lines so dense the paper wrinkled, and a receipt for lab equipment billed to a non-profit I'd never heard Michael mention. The second folder was stranger, photocopied ID badges, faces blurred by a copier that didn't like truth, and a crude organizational chart that placed M. Whitman, my husband, under a project name that sounded tastelessly pastoral, Larkspur. I didn't mean to play the cassette. I grew up in a house where you didn't touch what you couldn't put back. But the tape was labeled with Michael's handwriting, that engineer's neatness I could spot in a lineup, 1219, audible only. That qualifier felt like a dare. The vault attendant had said take your time, not don't bring a relic to life. I still carry a cheap dictaphone in my tote for interviews, nostalgia is a habit. The hiss of tape settling under a plastic head was indecently loud in that quiet. Then a voice. Not Michael's. A man younger, throat tight with a professionalism that sounded terrified. He said a date, the day before Michael's last episode, and a room number I didn't recognize. Then a sentence I can't forget, we are not authorized to tell them what it costs to keep them safe. The recording cut to hallway noise, shoes, the soft hydraulic sigh of doors, and then another voice, female, dry as winter air, if he removes the secondary drives, we'll never know how early they started. A pause, as if both of them were taking the same breath. He'll bury them in plain sight, she added, as if it were a kindness. There was a scrape, the clatter of the tape being stopped from the other side of memory, and then silence, the particular kind that feels like someone has decided to stay quiet on purpose. I rewound instinctively, but the reel wouldn't catch, a portion of magnetic ribbon had torn like a healed thing re-injured. I set it down and opened the third folder with hands that wouldn't stop their small tremor. Inside, a log, columns ruled in pencil the way a careful person makes order. Access, box 317 be pulled from months, dates, initials, tiny remarks. Michael's visits were meticulous in their spacing, 10 weeks, 14, 9, like someone feeding a stray life. Then, 2 weeks before he died, another set of initials I didn't recognize, AR. The attendant's signature beneath, pro forma and unbothered, looked like a man's name spun into a wave. Whoever AR was, they'd had the key or the right to be handed one. I tried to pretend that wasn't a betrayal. The pretending did not hold. I pressed the keycard against my palm until I felt its edges. On the back, under the red wear, was a faded gold stamp, Archive, Sublevel C. I thought of our basement and its hum and the locked door behind shelving that shouldn't have been heavy enough to hide anything and yet had. Sublevel. Archive. Words that belong to buildings that don't admit daylight. The bank attendant returned as if summoned by the idea of an exit and asked if everything was in order. I said yes because I couldn't say what was true, that the world was rearranging itself into a floor plan I didn't recognize. Back in the car I made myself do the sensible thing, photograph every page with my phone, front and back, edges included, metadata on. It's a habit from research work, an anchor against the way stories change when you're not looking. I texted nothing to no one. Instead, I checked the access log again and ran my finger over AR ovals, not points. A habit of someone who signs fast or often. The absence of a full surname. The way the attendant had not hesitated. There were numbers listed beside the initials that didn't look like phone numbers at first, C07, C09. Rows? Rooms? I thought again of sublevel C. I am not a person built for conspiracies, I am a person who keeps receipts. But even a person like me recognizes a breadcrumb when she's choking on it. I drove home by a different route, the one that skirts the old water plant and the stand of elms that lose their leaves in a rush, as if they remembered something all at once. Halfway there, a sedan eased into my rear view and stayed, 3 turns, 1 yield, a slow roll through a yellow light like obedience performed. Maybe every woman believes the car behind her is a wolf when she doesn't want to go home to a question. Maybe paranoia is simply noticing too much and not having anywhere to set it down. I took another unnecessary turn, the sedan didn't follow. My heart came back from its sprint too slowly to call it relief. At the house I went straight to the basement door and stood with my ear against it like a child. That hum was still there, low and almost polite, the kind of sound you forgive until it grows teeth. I pressed the keycard against the deadbolt for no reason except that I needed something to happen. Nothing did. The card wasn't for my house. Of course it wasn't. The tape, the files, the log said plainly what grief had disguised. Michael had lived a second life in places with sublevels and stamps. And then he'd tried to dismantle it using a bank box and a woman who thought she knew how to keep a promise. I spread everything on the dining table in the good light, the way you triage when you don't know what you're treating. The maintenance folder, a cover. The Larkspur chart, a map with streets erased. The cassette, a window that someone had tried to paint shut. At the bottom of the box, a single index card I hadn't seen, edges softened by touch. On it, in Michael's hand, if you're here, you will want to go farther. Don't go alone. No signature, no explanation, only a line below it, a reference number I recognized from a university building we used to pass on walks, the one with no name on its facade, only a 3-letter code, BRK, sub C, room 109. My phone buzzed before I could decide whether to be brave or careful. An unknown number. No greeting. No punctuation. Just a sentence that made my hands remember how to be cold. You're not supposed to have the tape. I did not sleep the night I decoded Michael's scribble. BRK, sub C, room 109. At 3:11 a.m., the letters wouldn't stop rearranging themselves. Berkeley? Brookline? Bricknell? By 4:02 I had pulled up a city parcel map, cross-referencing old utility schematics until the obvious rose from the mess like a watermark no one else could see. BRK wasn't a surname, it was a campus abbreviation used on archived building logs for the old Brookhaven Research Annex, decommissioned the year I met Michael. Subsea was not a subway line. It was the sub-basement wing. Room 109 lived below ground where blueprints forgot to breathe. The next afternoon, the sky had the steel color of rinsed coins as I turned off the main road and followed a fence line half-eaten by ivy. The annex crouched behind a row of wind-shaved pines, a mid-century rectangle of poured concrete and long windows glazed with dust. I sat idling long enough for the engine heat to fog the windshield, telling myself I could leave if anything felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. I killed the engine, pocketed my phone, and stepped into air that smelled faintly of iron and wet paper. The lobby had been stripped, but not erased. You could still read where plaques had been, the ghost rectangles cleaner than the wall around them. My footfalls returned to me from somewhere deep inside, once, twice, 3 times, as if the building were not empty but practicing the sound of company. Down a corridor of buckled linoleum, I found a service stairwell painted hospital green, its handrail cold enough to sting. SUBC, an arrow, and an ancient warning, authorized personnel only. I drew a breath that went nowhere and started down. The temperature dropped with each flight. The air tasted of concrete dust and old wiring, a dry metallic tang that settled behind the eyes. At the landing, a rusted door wore a stencil, "Lower Records, Access Control." The knob turned grudgingly, like something waking. Inside, a generator inches from retirement still sang in its sleep, a low animal hum that vibrated through the floor. I followed that hum past rows of dented cabinets, the labels buckling, stat, arch, SEC logs, until the corridor narrowed and the numbering began. 101, 103. 107, the paint peeled in long, papery scrolls. 109. Everything in me wanted to knock. Instead, I pressed my palm against the door and felt it shiver like a muscle testing itself. It was locked, of course, so was the utility closet opposite. Above, a corroded sprinkler head had bled a rust comet down the wall that stopped, conveniently, at a hairline crack beside the frame. I slid a library card into the seam and felt ridiculous, then felt the catch. A breath later, the bolt surrendered with a sound like a small apology. Room 109 smelled different, less like a tomb and more like an attic that had learned to keep secrets. The lights didn't answer the switch, but enough gray daylight leaked through a high, well-glass to sketch shapes, a metal desk bolted to the floor, a bank of dead monitors, a corkboard blank except for 4 pins, precisely spaced like a constellation missing its stars. On the desk, a ledger waited beneath a film of dust as fine as flour. I traced Michael's habit in the dust without meaning to, 2 parallel lines, a third crossing at an angle. He used to do that with sugar on restaurant tables when the food was late. I heard my own voice in the stale air. What were you doing here? Hook, the ledger wasn't blank. The first half was inventory, keys signed in, keys signed out, badge numbers, timestamps. The second half wasn't inventory at all. Between columns of dates, someone had recorded deliveries with no vendor names, no requisition trails. Personal item, held under seal. Archive crate, client pickup. Box, custody transfer. The signatures were initials only. One set appeared again and again, Imar. Not Michael Reynolds. Different hand. Different slope. But on one line the ink had blotted, and the tail of the R curled the way Michael's did when he wrote too fast. A mimicry of familiarity. A practiced echo. Rehook, on the lower shelf of the desk, tucked where your knees would hide it, a security envelope slept under a cracked clipboard. Thermal paper peered out like a tongue. I eased it free and read the label stamped in purple, Access Incident Snapshot, Sub C, West Corridor, June 12 to 2/19. The photos inside had ghosted with time, heat-sensitive prints don't age kindly. But the shapes were there, negative and insinuation, a human figure caught mid-step in a corridor I had just walked, a shoulder half-turned toward the camera, the neck lined in the thin chain of a key lanyard. The face was a pale ellipse with no features, overexposed into anonymity, except for the hairline, that widow's peak like an arrow drawn on a map, and the posture, habitual as a fingerprint. My throat closed before my mind allowed the conclusion, it looked like Michael. The timestamp said he'd been here at 2 in the morning this summer before he died, while I slept with the windows open and a fan pushing cool air over my bare feet. I set the photos down and listened. Somewhere, a pipe ticked. A drop counted time into a metal pan. The building's long memory adjusted its weight and went quiet again. I checked the corners, the underside of the desk, the back of the corkboard for tape shadows, pushpin scars. In the top drawer, a plastic sleeve held 4 access cards wrapped in aluminum foil, the back of each inked with a symbol I did not recognize, 3 lines crossing at asymmetrical angles like a shorthand alphabet. I pressed one to my phone's NFC and felt the faintest tug, residual programming, a vestige of identity. My phone vibrated once, confused, then surrendered. On the lower drawer, a sticker, property of Brookhaven. Below it, a shallow gouge where someone had pried before me. It gave with the same reluctant apology. Inside lay a box small enough to hide in both hands. Gray, archival, unmarked except for a single piece of linen tape folded over the edge like a book's ribbon bookmark. I did not open it. Not yet. My fingers knew the shape of bad choices and how they warm themselves to body temperature before you notice. Curiosity gap widened, a clipboard leaned against the wall behind the desk, clipped to a thin stack of intake forms. Someone had used a heavy hand, denting the copies beneath. Receiving, personal effects. Hold until contact. Transfer to, private executor. In the field for authorized pickup, the letters had been written carefully, block by block, to prevent forgery, E. Harper. My name. In a room I had never entered, months before the funeral where people mispronounced it and brought casseroles. At the threshold, I paused. It occurred to me that I had not considered the simplest threat: what if I wasn't alone? The idea arrived not as a sound but as an arrangement of air, the sort of pressure change you feel when an elevator stops one floor short and waits. I stepped into the corridor and let silence run its hand over me. No footsteps, no exhale, no whisper of fabric. Only the building's patient hum and, beneath it, something like radio static murmuring through the concrete, memory stored as noise. I left the ledger where I found it, the envelope too. I slid only the access cards into my pocket and, after a second thought that felt like theft and rescue at once, the small gray box. The door to 109 closed as if relieved to return to its prior tense. On the stairs, my hand traced the cold rail, counting flights back toward light. At the landing, my phone buzzed with a blocked number. The voice was male, not young, not old, the vowel shaved down to neutral. Mrs. Harper, it said, leaving my husband's surname intact like a test I did not want to pass. If you've taken what was left for you, you're already late. The line clicked once, and the static of the building seemed to climb inside the call to finish his sentence. I stood at the lobby window until the world recalibrated into cars and wind and the slow swing of pine shadows. I did not look back at the corridor. I did not run. The late afternoon sun had moved a fraction west. The hours I lost below ground would be paid back with interest later when the house remembered it was empty and made every sound important. On the drive home, the box rode in the passenger seat like a living thing. I kept wanting to reach over and hold it steady when the road curved, as if it could bruise. I did not open the box that night. I placed it on the table where our mail used to gather and leaned both hands on the wood the way a person might after pushing a dresser against a door. In the quiet, the house practiced the shape of my name the way the building had, pipes settled, the refrigerator sealed its own private weather, a clock in the hallway rehearsed the second hand's climb. By midnight the box was still there, ordinary as bread, dangerous as a small truth. I let the dark have me for an hour before I sat up, switched on the lamp, and made a list with the blunt pencil we kept for crosswords. Names, dates, place codes, a question I could not write plainly without tempting an answer faster than I could bear. Rehook, end beat. I was halfway through a second cup of cooling coffee when the porch light flared without my touch. A motion sensor, tripped. Through the peephole the yard looked washed in moonwater, empty, harmless. On the table behind me, the gray box made no sound at all, until it did. A soft interior shift, like paper relearning its shape after years bound flat. I put my palms on either side and felt it return the touch, not in warmth but in a kind of magnetic insistence. Whatever waited in that cardboard square had been in room 109 before I knew to look for it, had been signed for in my name while my husband still breathed, and had learned, somehow, the same terrible patience the building taught its secrets. I did not open it. Not then. But I knew where I would be at dawn and what I would carry with me, and for the first time since Michael died, the fear of knowing became smaller than the fear of not knowing. Artifact End. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday that sounded hollow, the kind of day when even footsteps had an echo. No return address, only my name in a firm, workmanlike hand, Michael's lawyer's handwriting. I realized after a beat, the same block letters I'd seen on estate folders and stamped copies of deeds. I didn't open it in the foyer like a person with nothing to fear. I carried it to the kitchen table and set it beside a glass of water, then rearranged the neat stack of documents I'd been pretending to read: insurance summaries, a property tax notice, the banal paperwork that follows death like sea foam. The box from the closet was still in the next room, its corners a geometry of bad decisions, its contents folded back into silence after a night of sleepless inventory, the burned-edge photograph with the lighthouse horizon, the route map annotated in Michael's slanted note-taking script, the photo strip stamped with a date that didn't fit any calendar I knew. I had been promising myself I would not attach meaning until meaning insisted. The envelope insisted. I opened it with a butter knife because that felt less like violence and more like permission. Inside, a typed letter on thin cream paper, the firm's letterhead faintly embossed, and a single-page addendum folded behind it like a secret waiting its turn. The first line read like a door clicking shut: Mrs. Ward, if you're reading this, certain conditions designated by your husband have now been met. The clock on the stove hummed. I listened to it because I couldn't listen to my own pulse without imagining it falter. The letter explained, with the clean, hygienic language attorneys favor, that Michael had left instructions to deliver a sealed packet exactly 6 weeks after his death unless he countermanded the order in writing. He hadn't. The packet contained a name, Harbor and Pike Trust. An address on a street I didn't recognize in a town I did, and a note that was not legal at all, a single line initialed in blue ink: she has a right to know. Be kind, but do not obstruct. I waited for a pronoun to anchor the sentence to someone I could brace against, but the letter had already moved on to disclaimers. It said the firm could not advise me on personal matters, could not guarantee the state of any documents stored with the trust, could not. Legal writing is a cathedral of no. Beneath it, the addendum, a brief ledger of dates and file transfers, a cross-reference of records that Michael had placed in safekeeping over 9 years, 5 months, and 3 days. Not arbitrary numbers, steps on a staircase I had not noticed under my feet. I smoothed the paper flat and thought of the lighthouse again, how its beam rotates through fog even when no one is watching. There is a difference between secrecy and stewardship, and I could no longer tell which one Michael had practiced. I didn't call the lawyer. I called silence. I let it settle into the room so I could think without the distortions of anyone else's voice. The kettle clicked, then began its small pre-boil convulsions, the cabinet door sighed as if it had opinions, and somewhere in the ductwork a draft wrote itself into the house's old grammar of settling and complaint. If grief is an arithmetic of subtraction, discovery is proof that what remains can still multiply. I drew a map in my notebook, kitchen table at the center, lines radiating outward to the trust office, the lighthouse, the bank routing numbers underlined in the box's papers, the address that didn't belong to any story I had ever been told. In another life I would have added the word coincidence with a question mark, but the last weeks had eroded my appetite for coincidence. I drove out before I had convinced myself not to. The day had the washed-out quality of a hospital waiting room, sun diluted by high cloud, the color leached from trees that had not yet committed to autumn. The trust office sat on the second floor of a brick building above a storefront that sold used textbooks and indifference. A bell scraped the air when I pushed the door. The receptionist looked up with the frank, unstartled attention of someone who experiences a small number of emergencies every week and files them by last name. When I gave mine, she checked a list that had been waiting for it. She returned with a flat gray file box and a signature card dated the week before Michael's accident, the word that polite people use when they mean catastrophe. In a small conference room that smelled faintly of photocopied paper and very old carpet cleaner, I opened the lid. Not a will, not exactly, but a skeletal arrangement of proxies and letters and scanned images authenticated by a notary's seal. A deed I recognized and then didn't: the house, yes, but tied by rider to a trust one had never heard of, with a contingent beneficiary I did not know. A second set of keys labeled cottage when we had never owned a cottage. A letter to a woman with my husband's best handwriting, the one he used when he wanted to think better of himself, the one that appeared in birthday cards and in the margin of novels he loved. The salutation did not use dear. It used her name. I could say I put the letter back untouched because restraint is respectable, but the truth is I read the first sentence and closed my eyes because the room had tilted, just a degree, enough that I needed the wall to steady me. The sentence didn't confess. It instructed, if I cannot come myself, someone will bring you what I should have brought years ago. The envelope had never been mailed. The mind does unlicensed renovations under duress. It knocks out walls, it opens a window where there wasn't one, it puts a door where there should only be a picture. I watched mine work. It moved through possibilities, illegality, liability, paternity, then circled back to the ledger dates like a swallow returning to a wire. 9 years, 5 months, 3 days. We were happy then, or we believed we were, which sometimes passes for the same thing. The curator part of me counted and catalogued even as the widow part of me wanted to shove the whole box into a fire and salt the ashes. I inventoried quietly, medical records, request forms bearing Michael's signature and the letterhead of a clinic specializing in inherited cardiac risk, a certified copy of a birth record from a county 2 hours away with names redacted, a photograph of a child taken at a school carnival where faces blur into the general joy of sugar and sun. The photograph had a thumb smudge across the bottom edge, the human equivalent of a watermark. I wanted to ask it a question and realized I already knew the answer I feared. I did not take anything from the box that I wasn't allowed to take. I copied the address on the folded cardstock and pressed my lips together until the impulse to say something out loud passed. When I returned the file to the receptionist, she nodded with the sympathetic efficiency of someone who has learned not to ask the wrong kindness. On the drive home, the world kept trying to look normal: sidewalk chalk arithmetic problems, a man teaching his daughter how to throw a baseball, a grocery cart chasing a wind gust across a parking lot, but everything had been threaded with a quiet, goneless alarm. At the house I set the trust address beside the lighthouse coordinates. The lines crossed like the way you learn your name by hearing it spoken in a crowd and knowing it belongs to you before you turn. I did not yet know who she was, only that Michael believed she had a right to something he owed. There is a generosity in that and also a cruelty. The difference would depend on whether I could be kind without being erased. I wrote one sentence at the top of a fresh page: I will not look away, then below it I wrote the name of the street from the trust card, then beneath that the word tomorrow. I left the box in the living room, where the light finds it at late afternoon and turns its lid into a low, patient mirror. I slept badly and woke before the alarm. The house made its early noises, a pipe clearing its throat, the refrigerator shivering into compression, a branch ticking against glass. In the dim half-hour before day, I stood in the doorway between rooms and I let myself feel what I had been postponing. Not betrayal, not clean like that. Something more granular, like sand in the mouth, truth worn round by time, still hard between the teeth. The letter from the lawyer had not given me answers. It had given me an appointment with them. And as the sky warmed from graphite to pearl, I understood that wanting answers and being changed by them are two separate verbs. One you choose. The other chooses you. I waited for the house to finish breathing before I pressed play. Night had settled into the walls, the radiator ticking like a metronome for a heart that had forgotten its next beat. I set the cassette in the old deck Michael kept on the office shelf, the one I used to tease him about, the one he guarded like a reliquary. My fingers felt colder than the chrome buttons. When the tape caught and the reels began to turn, the room became smaller, as if the sound itself were pulling the corners inward. First, hiss. A soft ocean of static, the kind you hear when a storm is too far to see but near enough to lift the hairs on your arms. Then a click, someone adjusting a microphone, or a nervous thumb tapping plastic. A breath followed. It was unmistakable. Michael's breath. I knew its rhythm like a lullaby and flinched anyway, because the living have no right to borrow the voices of the dead. He did not introduce himself. He did not say the date. He whispered a single name as if speaking it could trigger an alarm, Anna. The syllables broke in the middle, caught between apology and confession. I felt my mouth form the name before I understood why. I had never heard it in our home. Not once in the years we built a life out of grocery lists and Sunday mornings. The tape made the name sound like a room with the light turned off. Silence. Paper rustled. The hiss returned, but louder, as if the microphone leaned in. If you're listening, he said, something finally broke that should have broken years ago. He exhaled, and the breath fogged the space between us. I recorded this because I can't keep rehearsing the lie. I tried to leave it in the past. The past refused. A different sound crept in, wet tires on gravel, a distant engine, then a door chime from somewhere that was not our house. A field recording, I realized. Not a private monologue spoken in the office at midnight, but an event captured in the wild. The sense of being in two places at once tightened my throat. I heard a second voice, muffled, older, the vowels flat and careful, like someone born between seasons. You're late, the voice said. She's early. The words were simple, but they had the weight of a verdict. The tape pitched downward as if the person holding the recorder had lowered their arm. A door opened. The air changed. There was a cough, a scrape of chair legs on a concrete floor. Michael spoke again, and I recognized the note he used for clients he feared were about to tell him the truth, calm, almost tender, an invitation made from glass. Where is she? In back, the older voice said. You know the rules. Something metallic slid across a table. Keys? No, the cadence was wrong. A lockbox. The older man continued, you sign first. Paper again. A pen scratching. An impatient breath from somewhere to the right. The scene unfolded like a play staged under a single bulb. I did not understand the plot yet, but the blocking felt inevitable. Michael said, I'll take responsibility. You already did, the man murmured. When you left. A third voice entered then, a sound so small and fragile I did not realize it was speech until it shaped itself into a question. Is he kind? A girl, no, not a child exactly, but with the tremor of someone who had learned silence before words. The recorder shifted. Cloth rustled. Footsteps, soft, hesitant ones, approached the microphone and then stopped. Michael's breath hitched. The reels kept turning. He will be, the older man answered, not to her, but to the tape itself. The way people answer when no answer will do. My palms prickled. I wanted to stop the cassette, to cue it forward, to wrench the future into the open. But the curiosity gap is a living thing. It loops itself around your ribs and tightens. I listened. Michael spoke her name. Anna. The tenderness in it was not romantic. It was the language of vows, and it was not for me. He asked if she wanted water. She didn't. Someone passed a folder across the table. The man said, photos. Medical. The letter she wrote. There's one from her mother, too. A page turned slowly enough to hear the weight of each sheet. Does she know? Michael asked. She knows what she was told, the man replied. Which is that secrets keep people safe until they don't. A door banged in the distance. The engine again. The sound of an airplane low and off course. The microphone drifted, caught a fluorescent hum, found the room again. Anna's chair scraped backward. She stood, maybe to leave, maybe to measure the distance to the door, to the life she had not chosen. Michael said, I made a promise. I intend to keep it. No one spoke for nearly 20 seconds. On tape, 20 seconds becomes a verdict. You count your own heartbeat because the machine gives you no other measure. When sound returned, it wore a different coat. We were in a car now. Seatbelt buckle. Ignition. The turn signal's metronome. Michael drove, the recorder somewhere between the console and a cup holder. He spoke as if narrating to someone in the passenger seat. I didn't expect the eyes, he said quietly. I didn't expect to see mine. I stopped the tape. The button snapped up with the sharpness of a ruler on knuckles. The room swam. My vision tunneled so fast I braced for the couch to tilt. The name. The tender note. The folder. The question in a girl's voice. Then that sentence. I pressed my fingertips to my eyelids until starbursts popped. When I breathed again, the air felt thinner, the ceiling lower. I pressed play. City noise. Wipers. Michael again. This is temporary, he told the recorder, and by extension, future me. Paperwork first. Then the conversation I should have had 10 years ago. He paused. If I don't make it home before you find this. I am sorry. I should have trusted the woman I married with the truth of the man I am. Rehook. The tape cracked, then flared with the shape of a doorbell I knew well, our house. The key turned. The hinge sang its long, tired note. Footsteps crossed the threshold and hesitated. Another set of steps followed, lighter, testing the grain of the floor. Do we take our shoes off? The girl asked, barely above a whisper. Michael laughed softly, an unfamiliar sound in our foyer, and said, yes. She likes the floors clean. The rest was a collage. Drawers opening. A glass set gently on stone. The murmur of two voices down the hall. A door I did not recognize and sound alone, then water running somewhere in the pipes. Later, how much later the tape did not say, Michael returned to the recorder. He placed it close enough that his breath fogged the microphone again. Evelyn, he said, and my name laid its hand on my shoulder. I brought home the truth. I don't know how to give it to you without breaking something sacred. But I can't bury it any longer. If you find this before I speak to you, know that I wanted to start with your eyes on mine, not with a machine between us. The cassette clicked. Side A was over. I stared at the deck as if it could explain itself. The red LED glowed like a patient pulse. I flipped the tape with hands that did not feel like mine and slid it back in. The rollers caught. The reels hesitated, then spun. The hiss returned. Another room answered. Not our house this time. The acoustic felt narrow, stacked with cardboard and the wet dust smell of a basement where the light cord dangles like a question. A soft mechanical whir, camera, and the scrape of a metal chair. Then Michael again, lower now, tired. She knows enough to be hurt, he said to future me. Not enough to understand why I thought withholding would protect anyone. A new voice entered the frame, female, adult, careful. You planned to tell her after the will, she said. You thought death would sanitize motive. I planned to tell her when the past stopped behaving, Michael said. The will forced my hand. He inhaled. Anna is not a secret. She is the receipt. For what, he did not say. The tape did what tapes do. It ran out of room right where certainty should have lived. The reel slowed. The hiss thinned. The click came like a door you cannot hold any longer. Side B ended without permission. I did not cry. Grief is not a faucet. It is a tide that learns your house and waits for the moon. I sat on the floor of Michael's office while the radiator ticked and the house remembered how to breathe. In the quiet, I understood two things at once, the shape of the truth, and the hole still cut directly in its center. He had brought her here. He had planned to tell me. Something had intervened. The will in the study had not been his. Now I knew why someone would forge one. I rewound the tape to the beginning of side B and listened again to the last sentence, slower, as if meaning could be wrung from cadence. Anna is not a secret. She is the receipt. A record of payment. A proof of debt. A thing that says, this happened, and someone owes. The question was who, and how much interest had accrued while I slept next to a man who thought silence was shelter. I stood, the room unsteady under my feet, and set the cassette gently back in its case. Outside, wind worried the eaves. Somewhere in the house a pipe expanded with a small, aching pop. I turned off the desk lamp and reached for the hallway switch. In the brief passage from light to dark, I saw my reflection ghost across the office window, my face, and behind it, faint and slightly lower than my shoulder, the outline of someone watching with the patience of a person who has already waited far too long. I did not turn around. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because fear is a compass, and it was pointing me forward. The house was no longer quiet, it was listening. Every board, every hinge, every breath of air that slipped between the curtains felt aware of me, like a memory stirred awake. I moved slowly through the hallway, the tape's final echo still trapped behind my ribs. Anna is not a secret. She is the receipt. The sentence refused to die. It looped in my mind with the rhythm of a heartbeat. The kind that tells you you're alive only so you can feel it break. I carried a flashlight. Its narrow beam cut through the dark, slicing across the framed photos Michael and I had hung years ago. Our smiles looked rehearsed now, masks pressed behind glass. The beam landed on the one from our first Christmas in this house. He was holding a box wrapped in silver paper. I used to think it was perfume. Now, I wasn't sure it hadn't been the first secret. Downstairs, the air was colder. The heater hadn't been on for hours, yet every step closer to the basement door brought a deeper chill. When I touched the handle, the metal bit my skin. The same door I had once avoided, the one where I'd found the empty shelf, the faint smell of mold and memory. It wasn't empty anymore. The lock was undone. I didn't remember unlocking it. Inside, light leaked through a single narrow window, just enough to outline the shapes below, a workbench, boxes, a stack of papers warped by time. I descended, each creak of the wooden stairs sounding too loud, too slow. The smell hit first, dust, oil, and something faintly sweet. On the bench lay the cassette player, still warm from my hands, as if it had followed me. Beside it was a box I hadn't seen before. Not the "Do Not Open" box, this one was smaller, wrapped in dark cloth, the edges stained like it had been buried and unearthed. Inside, a single envelope. My name on it. Evelyn. Michael's handwriting, or something close to it. I slid my thumb under the flap. The letter inside wasn't long. Just one page, folded neatly, the edges smoothed as though he'd handled it too often. If you're reading this, the truth has already reached you. I did what I thought love demanded, I protected you from a version of me that deserved to die long before I did. But love isn't protection. It's permission, to see, to hurt, to forgive. Anna is part of me. Which means she's part of you. She was born of what I could not admit, and raised by what I could not face. I wanted to tell you, Evelyn. I just ran out of courage before I ran out of time. If the house feels heavier now, it's because it remembers what I asked it to keep. The words blurred. I hadn't noticed I was crying until a tear fell onto the paper, dissolving the ink like blood and water. Then, a sound. Soft. Upstairs. Footsteps. Not creaking wood, something gentler, deliberate, almost polite. I froze. The sound paused when I did. Then, a whisper, "Mom?" The word split me open. For a heartbeat, every rational thought dissolved. Michael's voice had been a ghost. The tape, an echo. But this was alive. Small. Fragile. Close. I turned off the flashlight. The dark felt safer than the truth I might find. The footsteps descended halfway down the stairs, stopping just above where the light used to meet the shadow. I could see the outline now, slight shoulders, long hair, head tilted as if listening for permission to come closer. "I'm sorry," the voice said. It was shaking. Young. Too young to be rehearsed. He told me not to knock until you found it. I tried to speak, but my throat closed around every word. The girl stepped into the faint spill of moonlight from the window. Her face came into view, and for a second, I thought I was staring at a photograph of myself taken 25 years ago. The same eyes. The same fear pretending to be bravery. She clutched something in her hand, the silver box from the photo. "I didn't mean to make you afraid," she whispered. "He said you would understand when you saw me." The air between us felt heavier than the walls. I wanted to reach out, to prove she was real, but my hand wouldn't move. Instead, I said the only thing that would come, "Anna?" She nodded once. And then, a noise from upstairs. A door slamming. The sound of glass breaking. We both looked up. The house groaned, not the usual settling of wood, but something deep, almost human, a sigh from the foundation itself. The lights flickered, even though I hadn't turned them on. The air pressure shifted, my ears popped. When I looked back down, Anna was gone. The box lay open at my feet. Inside, the folded letter I'd just read, but older, yellower, as if it had been written decades ago. And on the back, in Michael's handwriting again, faint but clear. "If the house remembers, it means she's still here." The wind outside picked up. The basement window rattled. Somewhere behind the walls, something, or someone, moved. I took a step toward the stairs, my body trembling but my mind sharpening into a single, undeniable thought. The house wasn't keeping his secret anymore. It was keeping hers. Movie camera to be continued in the final chapter. The box was never meant to stay closed. The basement held its breath, and so did I. The window pane trembled in its frame. Somewhere above us a door had slammed with a fury I couldn't name. "If the house remembers, it means she's still here." Michael's note burned in my palm like a brand, an instruction disguised as regret. The silver box sat open on the bench, humming with a silence that felt engineered, as if it had been made to keep sound out, not secrets in. Before we dive, a quick note to everyone listening: if layered mysteries, slow burn reveals, and true-life research woven into narrative keep you gripped, tap subscribe. It helps me keep telling the stories that refuse to let go. I climbed 3 steps toward the main floor and stopped. The staircase was an instrument, it played weight and intent. Right now it carried a restless melody I recognized from the weeks after Michael died, the sound of something moving where grief lives. I raised the flashlight and caught the glint of a nail head, bright as an eye. Dust lifted in sheets and settled again, snow inside a house that never learned winter correctly. "Anna?" My voice was steady now. Naming a thing gives it shape. Shape lets you approach. Silence, then a small reply from somewhere between the kitchen and the hall closet: "Here." The same thin tremor, a violin string plucked with a fingertip. I stepped into the kitchen. Moonlight cut the room into gray geometry, the cold slope of the sink, the long slab of the table where we'd signed the refinance papers we never needed, the black square of the oven door reflecting me back like a reluctant mirror. On the table sat the framed photo from our first Christmas, only this time the glass was spidered, the fracture lines radiating from the wrapped silver box in Michael's hands. It looked like the picture had tried to contain a blast from inside the past and failed. I followed a trail I hadn't noticed before, a faint dusting of chalk-white grit along the baseboard, like plaster crumbs. It curved toward the hall closet. I opened the door and breathed in cool, stale air tinged with cedar. Our winter coats, retired and dignified, hung like shadows. On the floor, the crawlspace panel had been slid aside. The dark underneath was as lightless as a closed eye. "Don't be afraid," I said, though it was to myself. "We can open this together." The flashlight beam licked across rough joists and concrete. In the furthest corner, 2 shapes waited, an old tin bread box and a milk crate filled with vinyl records, sleeves sun to a uniform sepia. The house felt like a person who'd learned to hide in plain sight. I reached for the bread box first. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, a tidy archive that smelled like oxidized metal and printer ink, notarized envelopes, Polaroids of a girl at different ages, baby with a birthmark like a comet's tail at the jawline, toddler in red boots splashing a curbside puddle, 8-year-old with a gap-toothed grin and a cardboard crown, teen with the calm of someone who has already learned not to need permission. On the backs, dates and a single letter A. Nothing else. Under the photos lay documents, a hospital bracelet clipped to an intake sheet, a monthly wire transfer record, a guardianship letter signed by a woman named Marissa C. in a town 2 counties over. And at the bottom, a smaller envelope addressed to whoever loves Anna last. I sat on the floor with the envelope unopened and the truth opened everywhere else. The will I'd found weeks earlier had rewritten my marriage. This collection rewrote Michael entirely. It didn't just prove a child, it proved a structure. A system of care he'd kept outside our walls, as if goodness needed distance to survive proximity to him. The crawlspace air shifted. I felt presence before I heard movement. When I looked up, Anna stood framed in the closet doorway, no longer a rumor but a person with mourning in her eyes. She was older than the voice had implied. 20, maybe 21. The similarity to my younger face was a whisper now, not an echo, cheekbones, not quite, the mouth, almost, the gaze, entirely hers. I used to sit there, she said, nodding at the closet threshold. When he worked late. When he didn't come. She folded her arms tight against the cold. I told myself it was enough just to be near where he had been. How did you get in? It was the smallest question available, but it kept the others from spilling out. He showed me the panel when I was little, she said. Said it was a magic door. That only the house and I knew it. He promised when the time was right you'd know it too. I should have felt anger. It had been a loyal companion these last weeks. But its grip loosened now, replaced by something stranger, the feeling you get when a puzzle stops being a picture and becomes a map. Why tonight? Because you opened the right box, she said simply. He left too many. He always did. The floor above us sighed again, a sound like old paper remembering it was once a tree. Anna flinched, then smiled at her own fear. It does that when it wants attention. What does it want now? For you to read that. She pointed to the envelope still in my hand. Whoever loves Anna last. I slid a finger under the flap and unfolded one page, thin and brittle. Michael's handwriting again, patient, apologetic. By the time this is read, choice will look like fate. But I need it recorded. I chose wrong first, then tried to choose better. Marissa was the kind of person who puts a bowl of water out for the neighborhood strays and remembers which one drinks with a tilt to the left. She didn't ask questions I couldn't bear to answer, she asked the question I feared, who will this child be to you? I said mine. Then life tested what I meant. I failed publicly and tried to repair privately. That was cowardice dressed as care. If you're reading this, love her without the architecture of secrecy I built around her. Love is not a hidden room. It is a house with working doors. I must have made a sound because Anna crouched beside me and touched my sleeve. She wore a braided bracelet, blue and cream, the kind you make with someone on a porch in summer, promise bound into string. I recognized the pattern. I had made one like it in high school for a friend who'd moved away. It felt suddenly possible that all the roads we take circle the same lake and we mistake it for different water. Marissa? I asked. She died last year. Anna said it softly, like lowering a flag. Cancer. It was fast. She told me then there were boxes. That I'd know when to look. And where? You've been alone since? Not exactly. She glanced up toward the ceiling. There's a difference between being alone and being left. I've learned to choose the first before the second can choose me. We were quiet long enough to hear the house resolve to a hum. Then the hum coalesced into a draft, and the draft found a path. Somewhere in the front hall, the radiator clicked on with a polite cough. The old system, dormant for weeks, had resurrected itself. I stood, heartbeat steady as footsteps now. There's something else, I said. In the basement. A cassette. His voice. I searched Anna's face for a flinch that didn't come. He said you weren't a secret. You were a receipt. Anna smiled without mirth. He thought he could pay the cost of silence as he went. That if he kept all the slips, someday the ledger would balance. She looked toward the kitchen window where the moon had climbed to the place it wears a crown. Debts don't clear just because you keep track of them. She was right. But something can be cleared. The air. The room. The future. We carried the bread box and the crate to the kitchen table and spread its contents like a topographical map of the years we didn't share. Records. Joni Mitchell, Van Morrison, a battered Springsteen, the soundtrack of a life that had run parallel to mine, same decade, different radio. The Polaroids in order created a motion picture, growth, weather, joy that refused to reconsider itself even when it had to. I brewed coffee on reflex, the midnight kind you make not to wake up but to stay right where you are. While it percolated, I read the notarized envelopes. One contained a trust Michael had established in quiet, small, modest, a stream rather than a river, but flowing since the year Anna was born. Another held a letter to E, dated 2 years ago, never sent. I keep rehearsing the conversation and always end with you saying, I would have forgiven you if you had trusted me with the choice. I wish I had asked you to prove me right. I folded it along the existing crease and did not let it cut. Do you want to see your room? I asked. The question surprised me by existing so fully formed. I hadn't known I had decided until I heard myself say it. Anna lifted an eyebrow. I don't know what happens after tonight, I said, honest in a way that felt like taking off a coat you've outgrown. But the house does. I gestured to the ceiling. It's already making space. We might as well listen. She exhaled in a line that could have been a laugh and could have been a sob. I'd like that, she said. We carried the box and the crate upstairs. The hallway felt different, wider by degrees. Michael's photo on the wall was still cracked. I left it that way. Some fractures are maps, not wounds. The room at the end of the hall had been the guest room only because we hadn't needed a better name. A bed. A dresser. The blue of an old summer. I set the bread box on the dresser and the records on the floor by the wall. Anna stood in the doorway as if at customs, passport in hand, waiting to be stamped into a country that was hers before it recognized her. Stay as long as you want, I said. Stay until you learn the house's language. It takes time. It confuses sarcasm and sincerity at first. She smiled for real then. It made her look briefly like the 8-year-old with the cardboard crown. I already speak a little, she said. I know the kitchen groans at 2 a.m. I know the stair smiles at the 4th step. And the basement remembers everything. We made the bed together. Pillows fluffed into clouds. The act felt ceremonial, like turning a key. Downstairs, the heater settled into a low, contented rumble. Pipes ticked. The refrigerator sighed. Familiar domestic sounds arranged themselves into a lullaby that made the past seem survivable. I returned to the kitchen to clean up and found one last item under the spread of documents, a small brass key taped to a card. On the card, Michael had written, West Wall. Behind the ledger. My stomach tightened with the old feeling, not dread now, exactly, but the literal sensation of a door waiting. In the study, the west wall was lined with books neither of us had truly read in years, divorce law he never practiced, biographies of men we were taught to mistake for monuments, a line of ledgers from our early finances. I pulled the third ledger free and felt a draft exhale from the gap it left. Behind it, flush with the wall, a tiny brass escutcheon. The key slid home like the end of a sentence. Inside, a shallow niche. And in the niche, a single photograph I had never seen. Michael, younger than the photo in the cracked frame, and beside him, Marissa, holding a baby whose birthmark flared like a comet. He wasn't smiling like he smiled in our pictures. He was soft at the edges, unarmed. On the back, 5 words, February sun. I believed again. I carried the photo upstairs and set it on the guest room dresser next to the bread box. It belongs here, I said when Anna looked at me with a question I didn't need her to ask. She nodded. We sat on the floor with our backs against the bed and divided the records into keep, play tomorrow, and what was he thinking? We argued amiably over Springsteen and agreed instantly on Joni. Midnight tipped into morning. The house, having been entrusted with too much for too long, relaxed by increments the way the body does after a held breath. When sleep finally found us, it was in slices. I woke to pale light and the sound of the mail slot clapping shut in the front door. Old habit pulled me down the hall. Envelopes lay scattered like modest birds. On top, an official-looking mailer addressed to me. I opened it at the kitchen counter, coffee not yet poured. County Recorder's Office. Notice of supplemental filings. Inside, a certified copy of a second will I hadn't known existed, a codicil, really, brief, direct, filed the week before Michael died. It didn't change beneficiaries. It changed words. It struck the phrase, to protect my wife from harm, and replaced it with, to inform my wife with truth. The law treated the difference as cosmetic, the heart does not. There was a sticky note attached, not from the clerk but from Thomas, our attorney, in his square handwriting. He wanted this sentence right, at least. Thought you'd want to see what he tried to fix. I put the paper down and watched dust spin in a shaft of new light. Then I did something small and radical. I set 2 mugs on the counter instead of 1. I turned on the radio, our local station, the one that still believes in morning voices. The song that came up first was older than both of us but sounded newly made. Upstairs, floorboards answered with a yawn. Anna appeared in the doorway in socks, hair a soft storm. "Is that coffee for me?" she asked, a smile careful and brave. "Yes," I said. "And the house says good morning. It prefers you call it by its first name." "It has one?" "It will tell you when you've earned it." We drank. We listened. We let the day arrive. Later, there would be calls to make, names to say out loud in rooms where silence had been law. There would be stories to map onto the new land we'd inherited, not just the property but the terrain of us. There would be visits to a stone with Michael's name and a conversation I would insist on having. "You were wrong about love being protection. But you were right about the door. I've opened it." For now, the only thing that mattered was that a house that had learned to carry secrets had decided to carry us instead. And we were light enough for it. The box had never been meant to stay closed. It wasn't a coffin. It was a hinge. It did not bury what it held, it taught it how to come into the air. If this story found you, share it with the person who keeps a box they're afraid to open. And if you want more true mysteries told with care, subscribe. The next house, the next letter, the next map may already be waiting on your street. Fade to the slow breath of morning. Cut to black.